for getting at the core of the human soul. Fiction and poetry, to me, are the arrows of meaning.
Hello, I'm Emmy DeGrappa. Each week, we bring you stories asking our guests the question, why? We learn about their passion, why they do what they do, why should we care, and what can we learn? What better place to explore the human landscape than from the state known for its incredible landscapes, Wyoming? And what better organization than Wyoming Humanities? Serving our state for over 45 years, we share stories, ideas, and wisdom about the human experience. This is What's Your Why? Today, we are talking to Sam Western. He is an author, writer, and a student of education and learning. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Tell me about some of the first books that you wrote, and what was your journey into becoming a writer?
I wrote, as soon as I got out of college, I wrote a couple novels that went absolutely nowhere. And it wasn't until I had moved to Wyoming and had started my writing career as a freelancer and lived in Wyoming for a while that this idea for writing Pushed Off the Mountain arrived.
Oh, interesting. Tell me about Pushed Off the Mountain. How did that... When you say that arrived, you did these two works. They weren't successful.
It arrived. I used to be a big game hunting guide in the fall. I don't do it anymore. I was out scouting for elk one time, and I've been writing a lot about Wyoming. I've been working a lot for The Economist of London, and I had a backpack, and then I had a journal in the backpack, which I put all sorts of observations in. And suddenly this voice said, "Write. Now." Okay. So I got my journal. I got this journal out. I was Write in the Rain, hardcover books. And the first words out of my pen were Pushed Off the Mountain, Sold Down the River. And I wrote the complete outline in 10 minutes.
And tell me about that outline. What does it say?
It just came, all the chapter headings just came bang, bang. They just came right. And I deviated very little when I wrote the book from that outline. But after I wrote it, sitting out there in the field, I kind of said, wow, what's this about? I don't know. Closed it, and it stayed that way for 6 months until I was actually in London, and my editor had taken me out to lunch, and she said, "Got any story ideas?" I said, "Well, I've got this story idea about Wyoming, how it's such a paradoxical place." And she said, "Go on." So I told her, and she said, "We'll take it in 3 weeks, please." So this is in 1998, and I wrote an article for The Economist called The Wyoming Paradox. And then the Casper Star Tribune ran a copy of the article. And when Bruce Burns, who was my senator from Sheridan County, called me up and said, "Sam, there's about 300 people that want to see you swing." I said, I bet there's a book in there. So I sent out submissions and got it published.
So tell me in a nutshell about the book, just, a synopsis of it for people who haven't read it.
I didn't understand why Wyoming, I didn't understand the reality in the numbers. The things weren't meshing for me. Somebody told me one time that I was working, this was 1985, that the University of Wyoming had a $120 million endowment. And I said, no, that can't be right. And it was right. And then someone told me also that one time in 1969 that Wyoming had $100 in the general fund. And I said, that can't be right. And so I went and said, well, what's the story behind these numbers? So I just started digging. Of course, it's a human story, invariably. And that's why each chapter starts with a different person telling a story about Wyoming. But it's how did Wyoming end up the way it is, or was, rather.
And what's your conclusion on that?
That we are a state that votes its identity as opposed to its economic interest. That our cultural traditions are very strong here, and there's a reluctance to embrace a different narrative in Wyoming than that.
Well, why did you move to Wyoming? Why Wyoming?
Well, I moved to Wyoming because my wife at the time was a petroleum geologist. And she got a job with Marathon Oil in Casper, and we were living in the Willamette Valley. So she got the job, and I could pretty much work anywhere, I thought, as a writer. So away we went.
And when did you decide that that was going to be your life and your living, to be a full-time writer?
It sort of came, something I always wanted to do, and I worked for a magazine. There was something called Wyoming Magazine when I moved to Casper, which didn't last very long. And then I started freelancing and getting regular clients. I covered the Wyoming legislature, including for the Gillette News Record. And so I got to know all these people like Mike Enzio, which I knew years ago. I was a reporter and he was the mayor of Gillette, or then he was a representative from Campbell County. So I always wanted to do it, and it was when I was accepted into a creative writing program at the University of Virginia that I said, okay, I'm really going to have to give this a go. This is a big deal.
And since then, what do you think has been your passion to continue writing, and what do you see happening with your writing in the future?
Writing is all about, to me, is the art of exploration and language. I just can't get away from, even though I'm a visual person, it's the power of language and the act of sitting down and figuring something out, of exploring it, of pushing it, pushing your ideas, and having your received wisdom questioned. And to be a reader and to read widely, and you're going to bound to run into ideas that are different than yours.
Okay, and how do you deal with that?
Unless there's something, for example, unless they're stridently ideological, which is to say, if they're like Nazism or something like that, okay, fine. I know about that. But it's when something else comes along that will challenge my received wisdom that what I want to do is go into that. Is not say no. Is say, why does that person think it's so? I want to know.
Okay, so let's say you've been thinking about this thing one way.
Right.
And somebody challenges your wisdom on it, your received wisdom. And then they are able to change your mind. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes, they've changed my mind. They probably haven't changed my beliefs or my values, and values almost never change. So my mind has been changed, but I'm still, I hope, in my core, an inclusive person, and I want the maximum inclusivity.
Okay.
In a society. But, for example, I've realized that there are limits. Someone challenged, this happened last year, said there are limits to inclusivity. How did that happen? I heard an interview on radio. Actually, I read it about a Danish official that was accepting Syrian refugees. And he finally said, look, we're a rich country, but we're a small country. And there are so many people in Denmark that have worked so hard to make this country what it is. We can't overwhelm them with immigrants. We'll take as many as we can. And he just said, there are limits to what we can do and be as inclusive. And at first I said, go away. The more I thought about it, I said, okay, what he's trying to do is this concept of fairness. The people that came before, the people that you want to come in, you want to be inclusive. That's a very small way to look at it. But I just said, all right, it put parameters around being inclusive to me, because I thought of myself as ultimately a very inclusive person. And I still am. But I realized there may be limits to that.
Do you have an idea of how we can deal with our immigration problem?
I don't. I don't, and I mean, we're a nation of immigrants, and I don't see that changing, and I hope it doesn't change. Is there going to have to be some limitations? Probably. I hope they're as minimal as possible, because yesterday, I was reading about the spelling bee, and the top 5 placers in the spelling bee were either from India or from Pakistan. These kids.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, that is so wonderful. They come here, not only embrace our language, but drill down into it. Roots, etymology, and it was just, I'm silly that way. I get such a thrill when I watch these immigrants, kids doing this. I think it's wonderful. Oh, what a wonderful, segment and addition to our society.
Absolutely. And we want to be a colorful place. That's what makes the United States so interesting and wonderful to live here. Is you want to be colorful, you want to be creative, you want to have all those innovative ideas, and they don't just start here.
Right, but what I agree, but what we're seeing right now is all those things like imagination and colorful and stories. As we get older, some of those are threatening. There are people that want things to stay the same, and they're not going to stay the same. But creativity and vitality and inclusiveness is obviously really threatening to people now, which is regrettable, but that's the political tone and tenor right now.
What is your latest book about?
I'm working on 2 books right now. I'm working on a follow-up to Pushed Off the Mountain that includes the 5 states that wrote constitutions in 1889, which I'll talk about tonight. But I'm also working on a book called Katana, and it's about it's a first-person narrative of an 80-year-old man who's in a retirement community in Flagstaff, Arizona, and he has a sword that he stole from a family in Japan, and he knows he has to return it. He can't sleep at night, and he's trying to figure out why I didn't, And so it's about what happened and what happens to him and what happens to his relationship with his wife. What happens to him when he goes to Japan, and what happens? Well, there's backstory about him in Japan, but it's about being 80 and trying to change.
So do you consider yourself a fiction writer? A historian? What kind of writer?
Oh man, ask me what day it is. There's times I am so smitten by history and I love writing history. I love writing about places and people, narrative history. But for getting at the core of the human soul, fiction and poetry, to me, are the arrows of meaning.
Are you also a poet?
Yeah, I would consider, first and foremost, the first book I had published was a book of poetry.
The one that didn't go anywhere?
No.
Oh, that one did well?
No, I don't know if it did well or not. I think it sold 200 copies, but I was a finalist for the Billings Library Book Award. But poetry, the distillation of the word, is my passion.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent to know, because I just met the U.S. Poet Laureate.
Wow.
And she read me a poem, and It was so beautiful. And she explained poetry that way.
And, I was so lucky because I was 32 years old and got into this writing program at the University of Virginia, and we had to take these traditional English classes as well as creative writing classes. So I decided I would take a class on Milton. What I didn't know, it was taught by a guy named Alistair Fowler, who I also didn't know was regarded as the most erudite Renaissance scholar alive in England today, according to the Who's Who of Britain. And he was so damn intimidating, but he was so brilliant, and I started working backwards. Who influence Milton, Virgil, the Aeneid, the classics. So I got the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and I read them all out loud. I read them all out loud twice. And I became so intoxicated with language. And then I started going on the Romantic poets and the Renaissance poets, and I read them all out loud. And that I never looked back after that.
When are you going to know success as a writer? When do you feel like you've been successful? And do you have a message? Do you have to be heard? Or is it that you really want just the power of words to resonate in your writing?
Oh, I think it's more, I'm 62 now, it's you would like connection with your reader. That's really important. But to write a sentence, as the Czech poet Miloš would say, that separates order from chaos. 3 words that separates order from chaos. It's a great day.
It's been good talking to you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Your Why, a production of Think Why, Wyoming Humanities. This has been executive producer Emmy DeGrappa. Please subscribe and never miss a show. For more information, go to thinkwhy.org.